Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the ultimate truth.
Hey, everybody, thanks for sticking around again this week. Gosh, another week going by, huh? It's August here in, here in the civilized world it is. So we're glad to have you folks on board. Frick Wagner getting it right here, as usual, right here on KNZZ, KGLN, the internet, and our podcasting, and who knows where. I certainly don't. Turn up anywhere is what I say. Anyway, so it's been another interesting week. I mean, this is one of the great times to be someone who isn't radio or whatever to talk about events, because there's just something happening every single day. For instance, let's see, yesterday, President Trump ordered a couple of nuclear submarines closer to Russia because of some, they were pretty idiotic remarks from Mr. Medvedev, who was the former president of Russia, which meant that he was just kind of, the guy that went in place of Putin in case he needed to go to a funeral or, buy some shoes or something. And so he said some kind of outrageous things. And so the president said, well, that's fine with you. I'm just going to move some nuclear submarines closer to you and see how that makes you feel. It's kind of interesting because one of the things that you have with submarines, and the reason you have submarines, is they're supposed to be kind of secret. Not that you have submarines, but like where they are and what you're doing with them. The whole idea is that you never can be quite sure where they might be at. Really, in many ways, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, over time, have been our most effective deterrent because they're mobile, obviously. You can't know where they're at. They are equipped now with fairly large missile structures that are fired with compressed air out, and then when they get above the water, kaboom, they start flying away. And they're very accurate. And it makes them more difficult to track because you don't have any idea where they came from until you see them partly into their apogee or something like that. So I think that's the fact that you're telling someone that, I'm going to put some nuclear submarines over there, is less than a tactical move than let's say a PR kind of move. It's a little worrisome. We're not screwing around here with these guys, Putin is not stupid, and he's maybe a little crazy. Hard to say, but he's got that ex-KGB officer thing where, he's quite ready to sacrifice people for something he wants, or he thinks that Russia wants. This explains what's happening in the Ukraine. Anyway, so we have stuff like that going on. It's almost every day. Also, the president fired a Biden appointee who was in charge of the labor statistics because he felt as though that she was messing them up. And I would suppose he probably felt like he was messing them up in a way that would make this administration look bad. I mean, is there really anything that a Biden appointee to any level of government doesn't spend most of their time doing, which is trying to do something to the Trump administration? So you can pretty much count on that. Speaking of doing things to the Trump administration, this really caught my eye, and maybe some of you saw it. I don't know. I actually took this a lot of these notes from the New York Post. It wasn't a top story, but it was big enough in there. And what they're saying is that San Francisco federal judge, do I really go on anymore with this stuff? Ordered a halt to the removal of temporary immigration protection for more than 60,000 migrants from Honduras, Nicaragua, and Nepal. Now, this judge's name, Trina Thompson. Of course, she's a Joe Biden appointee. What's happening was the administration was going to eliminate what's called the TPS. These were migrants from 3 countries that were allowed in because of disasters that took place in their country. And we were going to give him till November 18th to say, well, it's been nice having you here, but things have settled down, so hasta la vista, que sera, whatever it might take. But this judge, really dumb people are harder to find than you would think. I mean, you see them, but in positions where they're able to actually talk, write, generate, things that should be interesting, it's not as common. But this person managed to pull it off. She is, her opinion reads like a letter to the editor for The Atlantic, as opposed to a judicial opinion. She has things in there like the freedom to live fearlessly, the opportunity of liberty, and the American dream. That is all plaintiffs ask. Okay. Instead, they are told to atone for their race, leave because of their names, and purify their blood. The court disagrees. What is wrong with this person? What has happened is that, let me think kind of the dates on this. Some of these people have been here for, the Hondurans and Nicaraguans were given legal status to emigrate and get work permits in this temporary program as a humanitarian issue following Hurricane Mitch. Now, for those of you that follow these hurricanes, I'm sure you know, but when do you think Hurricane Mitch was? Yeah, it was in 1998. And they got this. They're still here. That was the temporary. Nepal joined this program in, June 2015. So it's just a little closer. After an earthquake struck only 50 miles from Nepal's densely populated capital of Kathmandu, which I think that's a cool name. But what Kristi Noem had said when they were doing this protection was that things had pretty much recovered in these countries, at least as much as they were going to, and the situation was very different, and it was time to go home. Temporary means, temporary. Federal government, of course, that doesn't mean anything. Temporary means nothing. Temporary means forever, and you'll be hounded out of office if you suggest getting rid of it. As she said the nations have since recovered from the natural disasters that prompted their enrollment in the program. So let's see, there's about 51,000 Nicaraguans, 7,200 Nepalis, and 2,900 Nicaraguans are currently in the program. Now, I'm sure there's more of these people in the United States, but these are the ones that are in this program. I'm sorry to keep turning pages here, but I had so many notes. So this judge has just written an opinion. Like I said, it's like a badly written letter to the editor to the Atlantic magazine. There was a time when if you had a bad opinion, you would try and couch it in sort of judicial terms. It might be dumb. It might be off base, but you're at least taking a shot at sounding like you were what you're talking about. This is especially bad when you consider that most of these opinions are at least structurally originally written and maybe filled in by the judges. They were written by law clerks, who these judges, of course, hire. So, once again, the chain of idiocy is clear. You don't hire people who are smarter than you, and if you're not smart, think about the people below you. Yeah, that's right. So, I was bringing one of the reviewers on this said that the footnotes by the judge contain nothing but citations to academic sociologists. Well, that gets around that old citation of cases and, the law and stuff like that. There was a quote there from someone who read it that said, people are making fun of this moronic opinion for being written at the level of ninth grade essay, but I'm just glad it wasn't written using AI. This was an attorney and writer of the National Review. She has no real compelling reason here to do this. When you read it, there's no reason in it. She just doesn't like it. And she essentially is saying that, you know what she's saying. She says that because of their names, of their blood, it's because of their race, essentially. And that they were improperly linked to migrants with increased crime. That's what she said. She also compared it to the slave trade, of course, just so you know. The weird prose comparing ending TPS to the transatlantic slave trade. If there's a statutory jurisdiction bar to even hearing the case, and she breezed right past it. That was another thing. So, that's what's going on this week. I thought I'd bring that to your attention, give you some idea of why this judicial reform is so important. We'll be back. Okay, folks, thanks for sticking around. Here we are back again, and I appreciate it. So, that little trip down psychotic lane with the judge in San Francisco, this is just a political move. A weak, dumb, poorly formed political move based upon imagined characteristics and motives. But she's a federal judge. She's an Article III judge, too. Now, Article III judges are referring to, of course, people who are appointed to the bench, the judicial bench, under Article III of the Constitution, which means that, 1, they have a lifetime appointment. 2, to be removed from the bench, they have to be impeached. You can be, and this happened at one point, you can be in jail and still be receiving your paycheck if they haven't got around to impeaching you yet. And impeaching someone, as we know, is not easy, even if they've done some really unusual things. So once you're up there, it's hard to get rid of you. It's not like you can vote them out. And, they can get chastised by, their other judges and things like that. They don't care. Come on. So what we're seeing is a flock of the unready and the unsmart. Is that a word? Probably not. To the bench. And you don't have to look very far to see what's going on. If you just have a few minutes, you can look at some of the stuff from John Kennedy, great guy, senator from Louisiana, in case you don't know, who kind of has made a sidelight hobby, kind of a gig thing, whenever these judicial nominees come up in Senate committee hearing that he sits on, Senate Judiciary Committee, of asking them many times things that were fairly low on the totem pole of knowledge, right, for legal knowledge. Some of the things that he asked were, you would be surprised. You think, why would he ask that? Everybody knows that. Like, what part of the Constitution created your job? Things like that. And when people don't know those answers, and that's the job they want to get, that is not just disturbing. That is emotionally terrifying. Because these guys have real power. And if you happen to wander into one of their courtrooms for some reason, get drug in there for a lawsuit or something like that, there they are. And getting things changed that, someone does at that level, the trial court level, is not super easy. Because they can make findings of fact and things like that the appellate courts, if they're following the sort of jurisprudence we think of, are supposed to give some deference to people like who see the evidence. Remember, the appellate courts, and that includes the courts of appeal and, of course, the Supreme Courts in the states and the United States, don't hear the actual cases testimony. What they hear is argument from the two sides, assuming there's just two sides, to something about what happened in the trial court and what should have happened versus what did happen. Now, that gets pretty far afield sometimes if you're watching some of these very hot-button issues, but still, nevertheless, so they're not seeing the evidence. So one of the things that they do, and I understand how this originally started, was saying, hey, look, if the judge below us is talking not about how the law is supposed to be applied or what the law is or, what's going on that end, but has something to say about a fact situation like the credibility of a witness or a few things like that, then we should give a lot of deference to that because they're seeing that and we're not. And that's okay until you start getting people who really don't pay any attention to the evidence. They already don't like it or they have another idea about it long before the courtroom doors open and somebody comes in to start talking about it. So it's harder to get some of these things overturned than you think. Plus, it's not something that happens very fast. Really, the appellate courts churn very slowly. If they churn fast, and this is comparatively speaking, criminal cases are usually heard a little bit more if there's some kind of problem between the jurisdictions, and that would be the appellate court, the various districts, right, that the appellate courts sit over, where someone said something about some sort of sentencing guideline and another set of judges in a different jurisdiction within the system says something else, and so pretty soon you have these competing opinions and these opinions like sit over several states, each one of them, and so the Supreme Court will usually feel compelled to step in and say, okay, we're going to have to resolve this. We're going to have we need one rule for everybody because it's gotten so different that it's a real problem, which most people can see. So much of what goes on in appellate courts is slow because, first of all, when the appeals get filed, then they have to do all the work with taking their ideas about what they should appeal, researching them, writing them, submitting them, having the court look at them, hopefully. Some appellate courts don't have necessarily a requirement to look at certain kinds of cases or certain cases. The Supreme Court doesn't have to take some cases up. We've seen that this year, when you see it all the time. They can look at something and everybody, down there below them thinks, well, they need to get involved in this, and they can say, no, we don't think so. There are a few kinds of cases that the Supreme Court is required to decide. Conflicts between the states, 2 or 3 other things. But in terms of a lot of this other stuff that we think of that comes percolating up from the other courts, the lower courts, they're not required to hear it. They can hear it if they want to under a writ of certiorari. So they can turn it down. If they turn it down, then, of course, the lower court's ruling just stands. And they've done that with a few. It's a little bit like letting you can do 2 things, depending on how your state constitution is written. If you don't sign, if you're the chief executive, say you're the governor, and you don't sign a bill that comes to your desk, some cases that becomes a veto. You don't have to say anything, you don't have to veto it, but at some point you can sign it. Or it can become law where the governor can kind of dance around it. The governors have a way of being able to distance themselves from unpopular laws that they agree with so that it doesn't look like they were going willingly along with this, even when they may have been the ones who proposed it to the legislature. So this whole system that we look at is a mess. It's pretty good in principle, but we've thrown a few monkey wrenches into it, and they have thrown it off. I've talked before, mass torts. These are these things where you get something going on where, cornflakes causes your hair to fall out, stuff like that. And you get enough people together to say, I ate these cornflakes and my hair fell out, and we're all from different states and areas. Then you can get certified as a class to say, well, these guys have an arguable position and they're all over the place, so instead of hearing them individually, we'll hear them as a class. And then in some circumstances, you have a choice of what court you want to file in. In other words, what area of the country or what circuit, if you want to call it that you can file in. Well, of course, you're going to find one that is either way on your side or not liking the other side. And that has really cost a lot of money. And the idea behind it was a good one, was that, and we talked about this before, this private attorney general thing. The framers thought that you can do something like that because, look, this is what makes it kind of funny. The Department of Justice and the federal government will never be large enough to actually take care of any of these problems. So the private citizens need to be able to have the ability to note a problem, see if it's widespread, go to court on the behalf of themselves and all the other affected people, and get some kind of resolution. That sounds pretty good. But when it's in practice, it becomes a huge problem. We've had several very, very largesse rulings about damages and so forth come out against products and so forth. With some of them, particularly when it's health damages, some of them have had what have been termed by a lot of folks as very specious scientific evidence. But you see, if the jury, or the judge in some case, agrees with it, then they can move forward. It's hard to attack the underlying assumption in those kinds of cases. So once they get their claws into them, then, weak science is just treated like anything else. It's treated like, well, it's just another factor. So they can bring in their experts, and you can bring in your experts, and then we'll let the jury decide. Right. Some of these are extremely complicated scientific situations. And a battle of the experts here, which usually turns out badly, period, because juries get confused by the fact that one guy's saying something completely different than the other guy and throwing out all this technical stuff. So what happens is you get weird verdicts about things that may or may not have happened. And then you get judges kind of like this. All right, thanks for sticking with us, folks. Rick Wagner here on KGLN KNZZ. That's 1100 KNZZ and 92.7 at the other side of the dial. And we're at 980 and 101.3 on KGLN. And, of course, you can listen to us live on the Internet, and you can get us recorded in podcasts, and you can totally ignore us if you want to. I mean, it's a free country. So I thought we'd turn our attention, after hearing some of this goofiness, and talk about some particulars here in the state I'm at, Colorado, where we have, as I've mentioned before, half the state makes sense. That would be the state side I'm on. And the other half is controlled by lunatics and people who have not particular talent in the intelligence department. And that would include, of course, our state legislature, who has many people in it who apparently grew up eating lead paint to stunt their intellectual growth. But that didn't stop them. They overcame that and became legislators, despite the fact that their IQs are about 86, sometimes maybe one or two on the side of that. Because when you read some of this stuff, it's like, what? So I thought I'd read one about what the state of Colorado, and this has happened in several states, particularly those that are resisting the Trump administration, right? And so what they're trying to do is make it as difficult as possible, and you guys know this, for ICE to get cooperation from any local or state agencies. In other words, they want to freeze up access to any information, sometimes to the actual facilities, all kinds of stuff, so that when the federal agencies come and ask for assistance to say, can we look at where the driver's license people are, where these people might be, or this or that? No way. They are protected. It's funny because it used to be that your stuff was easy to find. It's only when people are here illegally and that your legislature gets interested in protecting privacy. Isn't that interesting? You were an open season. But now, well, hold your horses there. We had what was called Senate Bill 25276. And it has a whole lot of stuff in it. And a lot of them has to do with restrictions on what peace officers can do and detention officers working with immigration officials and what they can't do. I should say why they can't work with immigration officials. The bill, of course, passed, in the Senate, 22-13. And that's just about the split we have there in the Senate between lunatics and people who are maybe not as lunatics. So what it's trying to do, and I'm reading here from a couple of different sources. One of them is KDVR, which is purports to be a TV station over there, I guess, and a couple other things I jotted down here. But what they're trying to do here, and here in Mesa County where I'm at, we've already had this issue where 13 days after this was passed, apparently a deputy communicated with federal authorities, a sort of like messenger or something like that, gave some information that under this bill would have been improper. This is as I understand it from just sort of giving it a hard look and then a jump away. And because of this bill, things have changed in ways that if you had been a peace officer when I was a peace officer, I would have absolutely no idea why this was happening and couldn't imagine that it would happen. It was completely out of my realm of possibilities. We used to have space in our offices for an INS, Immigration Naturalization Service at that point, office, and they were in there with us. And we shared some resources, and they had some things that were nice, like transport buses, and they also had access to federal information that was not something we couldn't get, but it was something that was much harder for us because we didn't know how to do it. So these days, that has changed so much. I mean, I can't imagine what that would be like. I do not want to be involved in law enforcement anymore if that's the kind of things that are going to happen. I hate to say that. I love law enforcement. I love prosecution. I love law enforcement. But the kinds of things that are happening now, I mean, you don't know where the next shoe is going to fall on you if you're doing this. Anyway, the Senate, let's see, they said that the bill is meant to increase, these are the sponsors, in data privacy for all Coloradans. Oh, okay, but it didn't come up until just now in immigration. Regardless of immigration status. Well, that's good. It has, let's see, around 11 proposed changes to the law. All right. Some of these really impact data collection and cooperation in law enforcement circles. And also do it for like public schools, universities, and so forth, that they are trying to forbid them from giving access to material that they hold to federal authorities. Just think about that for a little while. Okay. And so they're saying now that, there's these visits by ICE into Denver is a retaliation about that. I don't think that's the case, but they can think what they want to. What they're saying, and this is one that got me, I'd written this down. Institutions should not provide immigration officials with any personnel identifying information unless required by law. Which law? This is always an interesting question. Those places also should not allow immigration law enforcement access to any area that is not accessible to the public unless a federal warrant mandates access. I think that would likely play the jail, right? And you may have noticed this, that there's not a lot of public access to the jail. I know. Just not enough time to get it, I guess. Any part of the detention facility that is not accessible to the public unless required by a federal warrant or writ to transfer an inmate to and from public custody. They can't take the INS back to the jail portion of the population unless they have a federal warrant. It also prohibits the jail detention officers from holding on to a defendant until immigration can get there. It also prohibits peace officers, which would be police and sheriffs, from arresting or detaining an individual on the basis of civil immigration and detainer request. Not just picking them up and saying, I think that you're illegal alien. They're saying is there's a detainer file by the feds to say, this person we want because we want to deport them, please hold them for us. What the law says now is that you can't arrest or detain an individual just because there's a civil immigration detainer. Now, a criminal warrant would probably trump that, but they're working their way around that, I'm sure. And that's just off the top of my head. I may not know that. So, if they issue a detainer to you and say, hey, could you help us out here on getting these illegal aliens or this migrant criminal out of the country? Not so fast in Colorado now. It also is going to extend the prohibition from officers from providing personal information about an individual to federal immigration authorities, to include pretrial officers and employees. The courts and probation. That's what they're talking about. So they've tried to lock down all the information that you might try and transmit or be available to federal authorities for immigration law enforcement. That's what that says. You essentially, the easiest way to put it and the safest way to say it, you just can't talk to anybody from immigration or ICE unless they show you a federal warrant. Now, that's not required for most of these things. A civil detainer is usually what works. It says this person is illegal in the country illegally. We want to hold him until we can get him into our system. We're going to come and get him. Used to be that was pretty easy. Now it's apparently next to impossible. And not only is it very difficult, but the very people who work in law enforcement on the state and local level are prohibited from assisting in that. Now here's the question I have. Is that what you want? Is that what you think that this legislature should do? Do you want to see that happen? Do you want to see law enforcement officers, court officials, probably district attorneys, and their staff, all of them having their hands tied behind their back and then thrown into a river, essentially, when it comes to sending anything to federal government concerning immigration? Without us. Ignoring civil detainers from the federal government, which is pretty interesting all by itself. Once again, it's okay to ignore federal law when you don't like it if you're a blue state or half of a state that's blue. But if you want to do something that a red state's like, for instance, we'd like to be a sanctuary state for firearms, Second Amendment. We don't want to, some of these rules we don't like, we're just not going to enforce them. Yeah, that's wrong, you see, because that's wrong because it's not thoughtful, or whatever they would say. This is a crazy situation. This isn't something that normal societies that are on the right track do. Which brings us to our next point here. We're not on the right track, as we know. I mean, last week we talked about a really interesting topic that Michael Betts, a professor who studied sort of this uncivil civil war, and talking about how things can just sort of like unravel, not really turn into, the war between the states, but rather just unravel and become sort of feudal, is how I would say it. Feral in some cases. Cities will become essentially feral. The relationships between other cities or regions of the country to the government, state and local governments, and the federal government will become sort of like feudal obligations, I think. This is kind of a sliding scale there. But this is kind of what he was talking about. But that all turns into this thing we've talked about several times about the turnings, right? Historical cycles, 80 to 100 years that you can look at again and again, that there's 4 cycles it tends to go through, organization. It's like the cycle right after World War II, where everything got built, the baby boom, all this huge pickup in industry into the 60s. Then at that point, you start getting people who, they didn't have any part in that, and they were the kids and so forth of those people, and they sort of start questioning that and rebelled against it, and that's just something that happens in that particular generation at that time, right? And then you start getting into people who are now, you're 2 or 3 generations away from the people who started this original cycle, say 1945, 46. Just as one of them. It happens all over the place. That's not just the one. It's just using an example. And they now feel much less connection to why we have these institutions and rules and things that seem to constrict their freedom and their ability to do whatever the heck they want. Because they've been brought into a society where consequences are low. There's not as much struggle to survive, or there's no existential threats to speak of. They're unifying forces, and so they just think that they don't need any of this other stuff. They're just in the way and they're bothersome, and we need to get rid of them. This isn't like regulations at the EPA. This is like rock solid things like, do we really need a Congress? What about police? Nah, I don't think so. Then you get to the 4th turning. This is when everything starts to collapse, right? You get political polarization, gridlock, much more radicalization in the population, And the middle ground politics, we would think of the center, is just collapsed, right? And what happens then? Economic instability. What they would say is, if somebody that studies this would say that probably this cycle started a little bit after 2008, where we had, that sort of a very strong inflection point in the economy. Inflation had spiked then. Now we have housing volatility. We have wage insecurity and wages that are out of control in some places because they're being mandated by people that have no idea what the jobs are that they're requiring people to pay. You get all sorts of social movements out of this too. You start seeing them that rise up and they become very virulent. I mean, you get the January 6th thing that they like to say, which is just a blip. But then when you compare it to the big things, like the Black Lives Matter riots, the George Floyd riots, the Antifa, and things like that, you can throw something that happened on January 6th in there just to show that people had an unrest. But it's nothing like on the scale of these other things. These other things are fighting over core values in the future. And some of these guys don't have an idea what the future should look like. They just don't like the present. We had COVID, which really undermined people's belief in government. The healthcare system, which usually people thought was on your side, not so fast. And drug companies and this alliance somehow between government and pharmaceuticals and the health system all made people distrust that and don't think that they don't. Think about what even you or other people you know thought about the medical profession, say in 2019 or 17 or 19 versus right now. It's not a very long time. And we're seeing we're seeing a lot of DEI in medicine. We're seeing a lot of radicalism in medicine that you didn't see that before. Just an example. And many people feel like the old normal, like we used to have, is just not coming back. So what's going to happen? And you see this, I see this in really interesting things where people have taken advantage of what were essentially COVID restrictions, the aftermath of those, like your gym, instead of being open till midnight, closed at 8 for cleaning and this and that. And after the epidemic went away, they just left it there, right? Why do you think that is? Could it save money? You mean it costs less to keep the lights off, the doors closed, and everything locked up than it does to let people roam around in there and create problems and have to get cleaned up and, use up the valuable electricity by cooling themselves and stuff? Of course. Ideally, if you could have the most successful health sort of gymnasium, whatever you want to call it, would be one where everybody signed up, but nobody came to work out. Think about that. Oh, the building would stay pristine. You could keep the equipment all shiny. All you have to do is walk around every once in a while, like dust it off. And the money would just roll in. Now, there's a significant amount of people in that industry, as an aside, who that's exactly what happens. Many people that sign up for these programs don't follow through with them, or they follow through so erratically that they really don't utilize any of the resources of the facility. That would be great. Of course, the people that run the facilities, many of them are nice folks, and they want people to be healthy and this and that. But really, if you could make money just by building the building, getting people to sign up for it, and then just never opening it up, that's probably the best sort of model for realizing income, right? And we see that. Lots of places. Look at the way Walmart changed. Look at somebody, like I said, I use gymnasiums off the top of my head. Walmart, a lot of places have changed their hours. And they just left them. Because they could. People got used to them through the pandemic, and now they see no reason to change them. Normally what will happen, and this will probably happen, is that other businesses will see a niche and say, wait a second, if we stayed open longer, or whatever the case may be, we're going to get those customers that are unhappy. And so we're going to build a store, or we're going to take our store, and we're going to have different hours, longer hours, this or that. This is what happens with competition. This is why you won competition, because that's what one of the things they're competing with. Not just price, but they're also competing with convenience and delivery of what you want. So until that happens, things just stay the same, because there's an economic pressure to say, why should we go back to the old way? Because this way is cheaper. If you look across the globe right now, you see this crazy stuff. Brexit, when it came about, trying to get Britain out of the European Union, came out right around the time of Trump's first term. They've been fighting about it ever since. The people in Britain voted to get out, and ever since then, the permanent bureaucracy in that country has been struggling to keep them effectively in. Ask anybody from Britain that is sort of on the Brexit side how things are going. It's not going right. Not what they thought. And so that brings out the far corners of the political movements, because now people who were not really politicized are not happy, and they're more willing to give an ear to people who were pretty loud. But now it's like, well, yeah, you're loud, and a little worried about you, but at least you want to get rid of some of this crazy stuff, and that starts breeding on things, right? And you have let's look at Ukraine and Russia. You start seeing border clashes. That certainly is a idea whose time has come during a fourth turning. And of course, it's not restricted to Ukraine. I mean, we're having it all over the Middle East, and I suspect we're going to start in a couple other places. Remember, we just had some attacks between Cambodia, right, and Laos, and then before that, where? Pakistan and India. So it's all coming down the road. I mean, we're managing right now to sort of steer it away a little bit, but our ability to steer this stuff seems to be getting worse. China, at some point, because of their situation with their economy and their demographics, are having to crack down even more on people because they don't like the direction they're going, and people who don't like the direction they're going have a tendency to pop off, and the Chinese don't really recognize that because it's a bad idea to let people talk badly about you. So they clamp down, which who knows what happens there. We see it in local school board elections, everything else. It's all right there. You just have to take a look at it. And remember, it can be a good thing when it gets reformed, but there's no guarantee that it'll be a good thing when it's reformed.
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening. Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickwagnershow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.